Welcome back to the Simulator series. In today's episode, we are going to be creating the teleport system. Now, hopping directly into Roblox Studio, the first thing that we're going to do is start off with creating the GUI. Before we begin creating the GUI, we of course want to enable device emulation so that we're all creating the GUI on the same screen resolution. In order to do this, we're going to go to the Test tab, then in the Emulation section, we're going to click on Device, and you're going to want to make sure that your device is set to HD 1080. And now once we have that set up, we can actually get started with creating the GUI. So we're going to go inside of the starter GUI, and we're going to go ahead and create a brand new screen GUI. We're going to rename this to be called Teleport, and then we're actually going to go inside of the trade screen GUI and grab the list frame from inside of here. We're going to go ahead and copy that and paste it directly inside of the teleport screen GUI. We'll then go ahead and rename this frame to be called frame, and then let's go ahead and make it visible. Now, before we get too far ahead of ourselves, let's go back to the teleport screen GUI because we do want to set reset on spawn to false. Now that we've done that, let's get back to the frame and let's take a look at the contents inside of here. Inside of here, we have the title text label. Let's go ahead and update the text of this. Instead of saying trade, we're going to say teleport. Then we see that we have a request text button. We're actually going to delete that because we're not going to use that inside of here. Then let's take a look at our container scrolling frame. Since we deleted that text button, let's go ahead and make the container scrolling frame a little bit taller. So we'll just go ahead and drag this down a little bit. Now, if you want to know the specific size of the container, we've got 0.958 on the X scale and 0.778 on the Y scale. Then inside of our container, we have a text button, which is called template. Let's go ahead and make this visible so that we can actually see it. And then let's take a peek inside of the template button. Inside of here, we have two text labels. We have the action and player text label. And really, we only actually need one text label. So we can go ahead and delete the other one. Now, we'll go ahead and rename this text label from being called action to being called world. Then let's go ahead and center this text label. So of course, on the anchor point, we'll set both those to 0.5. And on both the scales for the X and the Y position, we'll set those to 0.5 as well. Then we'll go ahead and actually adjust the text of this. And we'll go ahead and type out one of the world locations inside of our game. So I'm going to go ahead and say Atlantis. Now, we also want to adjust the text X alignment property from right to center. And then we're also going to set the text scaled property to false. Now let's go ahead and increase the text size property itself a little bit. Now realistically, I want our text size to actually be about 42 pixels, but considering the actual size of this text label, we cannot see all of those letters. So let's also go ahead and adjust the actual sizing of the text label as well. Now for the sizing of the text label, on the X scale, we're going to go with 0.5, and for the Y scale, we can leave that at 0.7. Now that we've increased the size of this text label, we can actually see all of the text right there. What I would recommend that you do is actually set the text of this text label to the longest name of whatever world that you have in your game, because that makes it really easy to see what size you actually have to make your text label so that all of the text fits inside of the text label. With that being said, we're actually done with this text label. Let's go over to the UI corner and adjust the corner radius a little bit. We're not going to use scale for here. Instead, we're going to use offset, and we're going to set the offset to about 15. Then let's go ahead and adjust the UI grid layout a tiny bit. Actually, before we do that, we should duplicate the template at least once so that we can see what this looks like with multiple inside of it. And for the cell padding on the Y scale, we're actually going to set that to 0. But on the Y offset, we're going to set that to 10 because we want there to be about 10 pixels of spacing between each of the templates. And then for the cell size, instead of going with 0.925 on the X scale, we'll go with 0.9. And on the Y scale, we'll enlarge this a little bit, so we'll go with 0.2 on the Y scale. And now, with that being said, we're actually pretty much done with creating this GUI. So let's go ahead and delete the extra template that we have inside of here. And then with the remaining template, we're going to go ahead and actually set the visibility of this to false so that we no longer see it. Along with making that template no longer visible, let's also go to the teleport screen GUI, and we're going to set the enabled property of this to false as well so that we no longer see that GUI. And with that being said, we're done with creating this GUI, so let's go ahead and collapse the starter GUI. Now, before we begin scripting the system, we actually need to create a Gamepass for this because it was originally intended to be a Gamepass that players have to purchase in order to be able to teleport around to different worlds that they've already unlocked. So let's go ahead and create this Gamepass. We're going to go ahead and click on Create a Pass. We're not going to upload any image for this. The name of the Gamepass is going to be Teleporter. And for the description, I'm going to say travel instantly to areas you have unlocked. And now that we've done that, let's go ahead and click on Create a Pass. And now we can see that that pass has been created for us, but it says that it is off sale. So let's go ahead and click that pass once again. Then we'll go to the sales tab. We'll set this item for sale. And then I'm going to set the price in Robux to 1. And then we want to make sure that we click on Save Changes. And now if we go back to the passes display, we should see the Teleporter Game Pass directly right there. And it says the price right below it. So that means that it is on sale and it can be purchased by players. Now the next thing that we're going to want to do is click these 3 dots right here. And then select Copy Asset ID because we do need the ID of the Game Pass. So now that we've done all that, let's go back to Roblox Studio and let's go ahead and add that Game Pass to our shop config. So we'll go inside of the replicated storage, inside of the configs folder, and we're going to open up the shop module script. Inside of here, we have the products variable, and we're going to scroll all the way down inside of this table. Eventually, we should see the Game Passes table, and we're going to want to add it inside of here. So let's scroll all the way down once again. We see that we've gone to the bottom of this. Let's go ahead and add a comma right here. Then we'll create another table. For the key inside of here, we're going to say ID, and for the value, we're going to set that to the ID of the Game Pass that we just created. And that's actually all that we're going to have to do inside of the shop module script. So we can go ahead and close out of that, and we can collapse the replicated storage as well. Now let's get around to actually scripting the GUI and the teleport system. So we're going to go inside of the starter player, inside of the starter player scripts, inside of the GUI folder, and inside of here, we're actually going to go ahead and duplicate the settings local script. Then we'll rename one of these to be called teleport. And then let's go ahead and open that up. Now inside of here, we see that we have a variable for the replicated storage and the player service, but we are going to need to create a variable for one more service, and that is the marketplace service. So let's go ahead and create a variable for that. Then we see that we do get our state manager and our settings config, but we don't actually need the settings config. Instead, we actually need the shop config. So let's go ahead and update that variable right there. In addition to the shop config though, we also want to create a variable for the world config. So let's go ahead and create a variable for that as well. Then we have the remotes variable, the player, and the player GUI variable, which we do need all of those. But then we have our GUI variable, which is still set to the settings GUI. So let's go ahead and update this to the teleport screen GUI. Then we have our frame variable and our container variable, which we can continue to use all of those, as well as the exit variable. But then we have the on and off color variables here. We do want to update these a little bit. First, for the on color, we're actually going to rename this to be called unlocked color. And for the color here, we're going to go with kind of like a lightish blue, just like that. And then we'll rename the off color variable to be called locked color. And the color that we'll use here is actually a darker blue. Then what we're going to do is clear out all the functions inside of here, but we will leave when we listen to the exit button to be clicked. And we'll also leave where we listen to the update settings remote event, just because we're going to come back to this once we finish creating a couple of functions, because we're pretty much going to handle it the exact same way. We're not going to listen to the update settings event. We'll actually listen to a different one. But like I said, we'll come back to this after we've created a couple of functions, because of course we're going to use one of those functions when listening to a specific remote event, similar to how we do just right here. Anyways, with all that being said, let's go ahead and create our first function. This function is going to be called generate worlds, and it's not going to have any parameters. Now, with this function, what we want to do is we want to iterate through all of the worlds in our game, and we want to create a button for each of those worlds so that the player can click on it, and then they'll be teleported to that specific world. So in order to iterate through all the worlds in our game, we're going to say for underscore comma world in, and then we'll use the worlds config, and we'll actually use the world order table. Now, each time we iterate through this list, we want to go ahead and clone our template text button. So we're going to create a variable called clone, which is going to be equal to the container.template, and then we're going to go ahead and clone it. Now, of course, when we clone it, we do need to parent that back to the container. So we're going to say clone.parent equals container. In addition to that, we also want to make it visible. So we'll set the visible property to true so that we can see it. Then let's update the name of it as well. And what do we want to name it? Well, we're going to set that to the actual world. Now, inside of the clone, we have the world text label, which we want to update the text of so that we can display the specific world that this button has been created for. So we're going to say clone. And again, inside of the clone, we have that world text label. And for the text of that, we're going to set that to the world. And now that's almost all that we're going to do inside of this function, but we also need to listen for this button to be clicked. So we're going to say clone.mouse button one click, connect, and create an anonymous function inside of here. Now, whenever this button is clicked on, we want to check if the player owns the teleporter Game Pass or not. Because if the player does not own the Game Pass, then we don't want to let them teleport to different areas. Instead, we would rather prompt them to purchase the Game Pass. So let's create a variable inside of here called Gamepass ID. To get the Gamepass ID, we're going to use the shop config, and we'll say .get Gamepass ID from name. And now we need to pass the name of the Game Pass to this function. And the name of the Game Pass is called Teleporter. Now that we have the Game Pass ID, we then want to check if the player already owns this Game Pass or not. So we'll create a variable called owns Game Pass. And how do we determine if the player owns the Game Pass or not? Well, we can use the shop config once again. This time we want to use the does player own Game Pass function. And now we need to pass through the Game Pass ID as well as the player's data. So we're going to say state manager.get data. Now that we've determined if the player owns the Game Pass or not, we're going to use an if statement. And if the player does not own the Game Pass, then we want to prompt them to purchase it. So we're going to say if not owns Game Pass, then, and then we're going to use the marketplace service, more specifically a method of the marketplace service, which is called prompt Game Pass purchase. For the first parameter, we want to pass through the player. And for the second one, we need to pass through the specific Game Pass ID. Then, after we do that, we're going to use a return statement because we want to stop the function right there if the player does not own the Game Pass. So, if we make it this far in the function, then that means that the player does actually own the Game Pass. But before we actually teleport the player to that specific area, there's one more thing that we need to check, and that is if they have the area unlocked to be able to teleport to it. So we're going to create a variable called isAreaUnlocked. And now to determine if the player has that area unlocked, we're going to use the world's config because it has a function inside of there called doesPlayerOwnRequirement. Now, the first thing that we need to do inside of this function is we actually need to pass through the player's data. And the second thing that we need to do is pass through the specific world. So let's go ahead and pass through the world. Now, if the area is unlocked, then we know that we can actually teleport the player to that area. So in order to teleport the player to that area, we need to go ahead and create a variable for the player's character. And we can do that by saying player.character. The thing is though, is that the player's character doesn't always exist. So we need to use an if statement to check for that. So we're going to say if not character, then return end. So we stop the function right there if the player's character is not currently existing. And now we're going to create a variable called world part. And this variable is actually going to be the part of the world in which we're going to teleport the player to. So it's most likely going to be a spawn location or sort of just an invisible part, which we're going to teleport the player to. Now there's actually a really easy way to get this part, and we can use the world's config for that. More specifically, we're going to use the getWorldSpawnPart function, and all we have to do is pass through the world to this function. Now once we've gotten the world part, what we're then going to do is go ahead and teleport the character over to there. So we're going to say character. Then we'll use the pivot2 method, and then we want to teleport the player to the world parts C frame, just like that. And now that's pretty much all that we have to do inside of this function. So now that we've created that function, let's go ahead and call it, and we're just going to go ahead and call it right after we've created it. Now that we've called it, we also need to create one more function, and this function is going to be called updateWorlds, and it's also not going to have a parameter. Now with this function, what we want to do is, again, we want to iterate through all of the worlds in our game, but this time we actually want to check if the player has that world unlocked. And if the player does have that world unlocked, then we're going to go ahead and update the background color of the text button. Because remember, we have the unlocked and locked color variables here. So we want to modify the background color of the button based on if it's locked or unlocked. So again, we're going to say for_world in world's config dot world order do. Then we'll create a variable called clone. This time though, we're actually going to use the container and we'll use findFirstChild, and we're going to look for a child named after that specific world. Now, if for some reason we're unable to find this, then we're going to go ahead and return n and stop the function right there. But if we are able to find this, what we first want to do is we want to check if the player has this unlocked. And remember, we just did that down here. So we can actually just literally copy this variable right here, and then we'll just paste it right up here. So is area unlocked? We'll use the doesPlayerOwnRequirement passing through their data and the specific world. Then we'll create a variable called color. And now if the area is unlocked, then the color that we're going to use is the unlocked color. Otherwise, we'll go ahead and use the locked color. Now that we've created that variable, let's go ahead and update the background color 3 of the clone to that specific color. And now that's all that we have to do inside of this function as well. Let's go back to our generate worlds function for a minute though. And outside of the for loop, we're going to go all the way down towards the very bottom. And once this for loop finishes and we generate all of those world buttons, what we're going to do is call the updateWorlds function in order to then process and update all of the background colors of each individual button. Now, of course, we could handle all of that logic inside of here, and then we could skip over calling the updateWorlds function. But as you guys have probably seen me do quite a few times during the series, I think this is a lot more efficient. It saves us from writing the exact same code 2 times. And I think it's just nicer all around. So that's why I like handling it this way. With that being said though, we have to call the updateWorlds function one more time. And that is by actually listening to a remote event. Now, like I said in the beginning, we're not going to listen to the update setting remote event. Instead, we want to listen for the update island remote event to be fired off. And whenever that is fired off, we're just going to go ahead and call the updateWorlds function with the task.delay 0 so that our state manager actually updates before this function is called and all of the buttons are updated with the brand new data. With that being said, we're done with this script, so we can go ahead and close out of that. But we're not done scripting this entirely. There's one more thing that we need to do, and that's actually script the menu button for opening this GUI. So to do that, we want to go inside of the start player, inside of the start player scripts, inside of the GUI folder, and then we want to open up the menu local script. Now, looking inside of here, we have the GUIs variable, which is a table of a bunch of different GUIs. Now, we want to go ahead and add the teleport GUI that we just created to this table. So we're going to say teleport equals player GUI, we'll use wait for child, and the GUI that we want to wait for is called teleport. And that's actually all that we have to do inside of here. So we can go ahead and close out of that, and then we can hop directly into our game and test this out. Now, once we enter our game, let's go ahead and open up the menu. Then we'll select the teleport button. We should see that opens up the teleport menu. And then if we click spawn, we might get an error here that says you already own this item. Your account has not been charged because we are the owners of the game. And unfortunately, if you do receive that, what we actually want to do is reset our data real quick. So we'll change this from test 1 to test 2 to quickly refresh our data. Then going back into the game, opening up the teleport menu. Now when we click spawn, we should actually see that we are actually teleported to the spawn location. You might be wondering, why are we not prompted to purchase the Game Pass? And that is because we are the owners of this game, so we technically already own it. Now let's click Atlantis, for example, and when we click Atlantis, we can see that nothing actually happens because the player does not own that world yet. But let's go ahead and actually unlock that world. So I'm going to go ahead and purchase the last world, and we can see that once we actually purchase the last world, that actually unlocks that world for us. We can now see that the button has been updated, and when we click the teleport to that world, we are teleported over there. So we can now see that this is actually all working perfectly. Anyways, ladies and gentlemen, with that being said, that's going to be it for this episode. As always, if you did enjoy, smash the like button, and feel free to go down below in the description to visit my Patreon or my website, MonzterDev, to support me, gain access to this game, and also a ton of other assets that you can use to easily create your next Roblox game. Anyways, with all that being said, I hope that you have a great day, and I'll see you guys in the next episode.